Oh, there's something weirdly fascinating about true crime. It's like a train wreck you cannot look away from. But here's the thing, while we're sitting here eating popcorn and treating this true crime TV series like entertainment, there are real families out there who are still grieving, real victims who actually never got justice. And now there are real criminals who are now getting fan clubs and Hollywood portrayals. That this is why I am standing here today to say that this house will need to ban commercial media based on real world criminals. Now, let me define this motion. We are not talking about the news. We are not saying that journalists cannot report on their trials, convictions, or public safety. What we are talking about is the entertainment industry, the Netflix documentaries, and these true crime podcasts with these very dramatic sound effects. We're talking about the commercial exploitation of real criminals for profit. We are talking about the documentaries that pay convicted murderers for interviews and movies that cast attractive actors to play serial killers. The ban would mean if you're a convicted criminal, you cannot profit from your crime, and media companies cannot profit from telling your story as entertainment. So today I'm going to give you two reasons why we should support this motion. My first argument is that true crime media treats real human tragedy like it's a movie, and that's messed up. When we watch a true crime documentary, we are watching someone's worst nightmare. We are watching the worst day of someone's life for entertainment. Imagine a moment that someone you loved was murdered. And then a few years later, some random streaming service decides to make a dramatic series about it. They hire actors to reenact your loved one's final moments. They interview the killer and pay him for his exclusive story, and they add some suspenseful editing to make it more engaging. And then millions of people watch it, and then they comment on it, and then treat it like it's a fictional movie. And how would that make you feel? This isn't like families of victims have spoken out again and again, and they're begging for their loved ones' stories not to be exploited. But the media doesn't care because true crime sells and makes them money. And by banning commercial media based on real criminals, we're not just protecting the public, we're also protecting the people who have already suffered enough. So we're basically trying to say to them that their pain is not our entertainment. My second argument is that true crime media turns killers into celebrity, and that is genuinely dangerous. We've created through true crime media where criminals become a culture where criminals become celebrities, and that's terrifying. When we make movies and documentaries that turn real killers into complex characters, often played by attractive actors, we are glorifying them and we are making them interesting, and of course we are making them famous, and for some people we're making them aspirational. This isn't there have been real life documented cases of people being inspired by true crime media to commit their own crimes. There are cases of serial killers receiving marriage proposals in prison because someone fell in love with them after watching a documentary. And by banning commercial media based on real criminals, we cut this culture from happening. We stop turning monsters and criminals into celebrities, and we stop giving them a platform. We will stop making their crimes look cool and suspenseful and fascinating. This motion isn't about censorship. It is about protecting victims and their families from being exploited. It's about stopping the glorification of dangerous criminals. And it's about drawing a clear line between information and entertainment. Some stories do not belong on Netflix. So let's ban the commercial exploitation of real criminals for both the victims and for our own humanity. So therefore, we are proud to propose this motion. Thank you.
Today's motion asks whether commercial media based on real criminals should be banned. And as the opposition, I say absolutely not. The government wants to remove an entire category of storytelling from the society. The opposition will show that this content forces society to confront its own darkness honestly and equips ordinary people with knowledge that actually keeps them much safer. Let me begin my rebuttals first. On the government's point on grief and entertainment, they say that real people are grieving while others watch their tragedy for entertainment. They use this in an example. But our second argument already answered this, which I'll cover on. This content protects millions of ordinary people by teaching them to recognize danger before before it actually reaches them. And the government is asking you to weigh the discomfort of some against the genuine safety of millions. Those two things are absolutely not comparable. And on a point where they said the government built their own entire argument around content that audiences voluntarily seek out. Nobody is forced to watch a true crime video or like a documentary.
I
A ban is to protect people from content they didn't want. It removes a choice like from everyone, including the millions who engage with it responsibly, removing a choice from an entire society to protect some people from their own voluntary decisions is not protection at all. And these criminals were already famous before any on their points on glorification of these criminals. These criminals were already famous before any show was made about them. The media didn't create this fascination. It responded to the one who already existed. And the content that reaches the most people overwhelmingly portrays criminals as damaged and destructive, not admirable. And the glorification claim assumes audiences can't watch something without wanting to imitate it, which is a deeply condescending view of how people will actually think. Now moving on to my substantives. The first one is on how like banning this content is society choosing comfortable ignorance, you may say, over like the uncomfortable truth. Well, the central claim in this is that crime media forces society to confront something it would rather look away from. And that confrontation is what makes society more capable of recognizing this evil. So when people watch a series about a serial killer, they aren't just like watching some monstrous and alien person. They're watching someone who had neighbors, they had colleagues, their family members who miss those signs. And that is deeply uncomfortable because it means that the people around us could miss those like same signs, if you may. Like it means we could as well. That discomfort is the entire point. It forces ordinary people to ask how this happened, who failed, and what everyone around this person was looking away from. So those are the questions that actually lead to change. So the government's ban removes that say discomfort permanently, and a society that has never been forced to sit with those questions doesn't become more moral. It becomes like less capable of say asking these questions when it actually matters because it's spent years being protected from ever having to. Now you may just say, oh yeah, can't people just know these things from like school lessons or just general knowledge and stuff? But no, as my second speaker will later cover, media is what reaches the majority of people the most. So this ban is exactly what will stop people from being informed on these issues. And the impact here is that every time society looks away from something dark, that darkness finds more room to like operate. The people who benefit most from a public that doesn't understand how evil works are the people doing the evil themselves. So the government's ban serves them far more than it serves anyone else. My second substantive is that this content is the primary way ordinary people like learn how criminals actually operate, building on my first case, and that knowledge genuinely actually protects them. The central claim here is that criminal behavior follows recognizable patterns, and crime media is the main channel through which that knowledge reaches people at a scale nothing else can actually match. Think about how most people learn to recognize grooming behavior, like coercive control in relationship, or the psychological tactics used by like scammers and like fraud people use fraud. So it doesn't come from a school lesson or like a government lecture or something. It comes from watching those exact dynamics dramatized in shows and films that millions of people actually watch and remember. Where the impact here is that the danger this media disguise exists in the real world right now. The knowledge it produces is genuinely protective in a way that almost nothing else reaches people at that scale. That is exactly that is the exact opposite of what a responsible government should be doing. So for all these reasons, I could not be more proud to oppose. Thank you very much.
So, first in this speech, I will do two things. First, I will rebut to the opposition first speaker. Then I will deliver my arguments in support of the opposition side. So, first, the rebuttals, where the opposition wants to protect these true crime shows because they think that they offer some deep, philosophical, like look into the human mind, but they are completely blind to like this toxic hype culture these shows actually create. So first on it, like it helps us emphasize and heal argument where the op is trying to argue that true criminal media allows society to process tragedy and blind empathy for victims or build empathy for these victims. But let's look at like how these people actually watch this stuff. Like it doesn't create empathy, it creates like density, like it completely like blinds us, and that how people are literally treat these horrific real world tragedies as background noises while they do like chores or eat dinner or watch graphic enactments of like real human torture, and it turns human suffering into a cheap entertainment. The opposition states that the criminal is already famous for their acts, but they completely ignore the difference between a public media versus a single line on a newspaper. What is the necessity? What is the necessity of sharing this whole story over and over again for the public? Second, on the it raises awareness about safety argument that the opposition was trying to show, where they claim that by watching these shows teaches people how to stay safe. But as the info slide points out, we are talking about media that like made strictly for profit, and because of that, these companies rely on extreme rare cases like genuine and like genius serial killers or like international like I don't know, drug cartel dealers, and because of these normal, and then it basically ignores these normal everyday crimes that don't make for a binge worth television, and it doesn't keep you safe. It basically just makes you irritationally paranoid about these threats that actually don't exist. And because of now moving on to my argument, because of these crime themed shows, movies, and video games that are commercial products created strictly for profit, they are structurally forced to make the criminal look intelligent, complex, or completely ahead of the police just to keep the audience hooked and entertained. And when you wrap an like atrocious act in a high production Hollywood glamour, dramatic music, etc., you aren't just telling a story. You are basically showing people exactly how to capture the entire world's like attention, and deeply unstable individuals or people who are completely desperate for notoriety or to see this like especially when they see this and realize that the fastest way to get their names known globally, talked about on social media, and eventually immortalized with their streaming series is to replicate or escalate these horrific crimes and horrific acts. And this is definitely not like what the world wants. So by allowing media companies to continuously broadcast these detailed, dramatized crime playbooks to the public, we are actively feeding these the toxic desire of for infamy, and that motivates lots of like people with um like unhealthy intentions. And let's look at the consequences of these media-driven glorification. First, there is inspiration for real-world violence, which basically unstable viewers can actively use these shows for step-by-step guides, copying the exact methods, setups, or evasion tactics used by past criminals, and also creating a safe net for crime. When the moment we take away the guaranteed reward of internal fame, a Hollywood spotlight, or a cultural obsession, we remove the primary incentive of these crimes to strike in the first place. So, in conclusion, the justice system is not a playground for scriptwriters. It's a real world safety that shouldn't be compromised for a streaming company's quarterly profits. So this is why our team believes that it is important to ban these type of media. We are proud to propose.
Good morning, adjudicator, opposition, and everyone here today. The proposition wants to ban commercial media based on real-world criminals and frames that as protecting people. Today, I'll show you why it removes the most powerful accountability tool society has and hands government a censorship mechanism with no logical stopping point. I'll first argue that this media holds institutions accountable in ways nothing else can, and second, that the principle behind this ban does not stop where the proposition claims. So, I'll first rebut. The proposition conflates two completely separate things: bad content that glorifies criminals and the entire category of commercial media based on real criminals. So, the solution is to ban bad content that is regulation and content standards, not a blanket ban that destroys whatever series is romanticized, like Ted Bundy. You don't burn down a library because some books are poorly written. They also said criminals get paid for their stories, which is largely false. Most jurisdictions have a law that doesn't allow criminals from getting paid from their crimes. They stated this as a fact with no source, and it is not a fact. They've also stated that families do not want their pain induced entertainment, which is genuinely true. But the answer is they consent. They consent to the frameworks and they have victim protections. It's not a total ban that simultaneously destroys documents exposing wrongful convictions. You can't design a policy around the worst case and ignore everything you destroy in the process. The second speaker said this media doesn't create empathy. It blinds us, turning human suffering into background entertainment. But this assumes audience are passive, consumers incapable of genuine engagement. Making a murder did not make audience numb to suffering. It made 40 million furious enough to demand justice. That's not numbness. This is empathy at a scale producing real-world accountability. They've also said that commercial incentives structurally force producers to make criminals look smart and aspirational. But this is an argument for content regulation, not a blanket ban. Poorly made content that glorifies criminals already faces public backlash, platform pressure, and regulatory scrutiny. The mechanism to address bad content already exists. Finally, they said that media inspires copycat crimes with no source. Correlation between crimes and true crime consumption has never been established. We will not let an unsourced assertion anchor an argument for banning an entire category of media. Now, onto my substantives. My first substantive is that this media is the most effective and only accountability tool that actually reaches people. Think about it. Court documents are public. Police reports are public. Trial transcripts are public. No one reads them. Not because they don't care. They do, of course, as shown by the true crimes, but it's because those medias are inaccessible to many people. Commercial media breaks that barrier. When a dramatized series about a wrong conviction reaches 40 million people in a weekend, it forces an entire society to wake up and to confront institutional failure in a form that they can actually engage with. So the mechanism is it's provable because making a murder generated enough public pressure to reopen investigation. These outcomes came from ordinary people watching content and refusing to look away. Collective attention created pressure on institutions, and they couldn't ignore this. The proposition ban does not make court documents more accessible. It simply removes the one format that reaches ordinary people. The accountability disappears entirely, and institutions return to operating without scrutiny, which is precisely the condition in which misconduct flourishes. My second argument is that the principle behind this ban has no logical boundary. The principle is this: content about real people should be banned when which are commercially motivated and risk squashing public perception. That principle has nothing to do in its limits to criminals. A documentary about a corrupt politician fits. A dramatization of a corporate scandal fits. A film about the controversial war fits. These propositions cannot explain why it does not. Once established in law, governments do not need legislation to expand it. They rely on the same principle to the next uncomfortable story, and the one after that, silently, with no one caring. The content this ban overwhelmingly this ban does captures the state failure, wrongful convictions, police brutality, prosecutorial misconduct. These are all specifically stories that governments find most threatening, and they now have the power to hide it, to conceal it, to ban these stories that threaten them the most, and we trust that they will not use it. In conclusion, the media reaches people that nothing else can reach. These films have an undeniable reach that can reach everyone in society. It can cause an entire society to wake up in overnight. This forces accountability. Nothing else can do, and tell stories that people would prefer stay buried, even the government. That's what we are proud to negate this motion. Thank you.
As a prop whip, my role is to describe the main clashes in this debate and show why proposition effectively wins every single one of them. First, let me deal with government's extension. Government says this kind of media helps ordinary people understand what not to do, and that banning it is condescending because it assumes audience will blindly imitate criminals. But that is not our argument. We're not saying every viewer will copy crime. Our argument is that media shapes what people think, normalize, or remember. Even if most viewers do not imitate criminals, these stories still affect public perception by turning offenders into these characters which people may admire or just remember. That is a real harm because it shifts focus away from victims and towards the criminal's image. And they also say that the ban removes the ability to ask questions and be knowledgeable about these issues, but that is a false choice. We're not banning discussion, journalism, documentaries, or education about crime. We're banning these profit-driven entertainment industry that dramatizes and turns these actual real suffering into this commercialized TV shows. So the ability to learn about crime still exists. It just does not need to come through glamorized content. Second, let me defend our extension. We showed that this media re-traumatizes victims and their families. Those people should not have to relive their trauma because a studio wants a good story. So we also showed that commercial true crime glorifies criminals. Even when the intent is supposedly cautionary, the format often makes them look fascinating, or perhaps making people believe that, making people imitate them. So, and we showed in that this creates dangerous fan cultures where audience become obsessed with criminals in ways that normalize harmful behavior or even influences their behavior. So next, let's weigh this debate. Government says we are attacking the whole industry when we criticize this kind of media, but that is not true. We are not saying every movie, show, or documentary about crime is bad. We are saying that the commercialized, dramatized version of real crime is harmful because it turns someone's suffering into this commercialized entertainment. That is very different from serious reporting, education, or historical discussion. They also say that victims are consenting, but that does not solve the problem. First, not every victim or family member actually agrees. Second, even when permission is given, that does not mean the harm disappears. A person can say yes because of money, pressure, or lack of options, and that still does not make the results fair or respectful. More importantly, consent from one person does not erase the wider effect. Even if the family agrees, the media can still glorify the criminal, attract fan behavior, and cause the problems in behavior that opposition has not find a way to solve or rebut. So the response only proves that some people may allow it, not that it is okay overall. So next, I want to talk about the main clashes in this debate. First, whether this is really education or it's whether this is really education. We say that this teaches people Op says that this teaches people what not to do, but we say that education should not come at the cost of turning real suffering into entertainment. Second, public understanding versus the actual harm that caused to this victim. So government claims the public becomes more knowledgeable, but we show that the actual cost is borne by the victims and their family, who are re-traumatized. And thirdly, whether this is actually good discussion or just commercialization. Government says a ban blocks questions, but real discussion can still happen through non-exploitative channels. So what we are banning is this kind of commercialization of the crime and not the knowledge itself. So even if government gets some educational value or claims that it helps people by helping them understand and know what to act in these crimes, it is outweighed by the harm of glorification, re-traumatization, and the dangerous fan culture. For those reasons, Proposition clearly wins, and we proudly propose. Thank you.
Okay. So Proposition wants you to believe that removing this content from public life makes society safer and more just. But like today, I'm going to show you why it is that it actually does the opposite, why the opposition wins this side of the debate. So I would like to first go on to some rebuttals made by to oppose the other team. The proposition clarified today that they're not banning documentaries, just entertainment media that could attract bad fan bases and toxic views. But that definition is doing an enormous amount of work that they haven't actually told you how you can draw a line in that practice. Like, who decides what content is likely to attract a toxic fan base? Because the same story about the same criminal can be received completely different by different audiences. A drama that humanizes a killer to help audiences understand how someone ends up there could easily be labeled as glorifying by the proposition standards, while actually serving a really important social purpose. The proposition is asking you to trust that whoever enforces this ban will constantly and fairly identify which content produces bad audiences and which doesn't. And that's just not a power that can be exercised neutrally or consistently or by a single person. Like, on the glorification point, the proposition assumes that if you remove the entertainment, the toxic fan base disappear with it. But that's not how this works. The mystique around certain criminals tends to grow when content about them is sort of suppressed, not when it is examined openly. Removing the entertainment doesn't make people less interested. It just makes that interest get pushed along towards less responsible corners of the internet. And there's no editorial oversight at all. The proposition's ban doesn't solve the problem they've identified. It just moves it somewhere harder and harder for other people to see, and even harder for most people to address directly. Now I'd like to go on to summarizing. The first thing I want to talk about is that this content is genuinely how ordinary people learn how criminals operate, and that knowledge actually protects them. When people engage with media about how scammers build trust, with victims, or say how predators identify and isolate targets, they walk away with a practical understanding of how things work in the real world, as elaborated on by my second speaker. The proposition has spent this debate focusing on the discomfort this content produces, but they completely ignored how what happens to people's safety when that knowledge disappears. A public that doesn't understand how crime actually operates or works is a public that is generally easier to victimize, and the entertainment media is often the format that reaches the widest audiences with that information, as some may appeal to teenagers, some might appeal to adults. The second thing, as my teammates established about the dangerous implication of where this man leads, what I want to push first is that actually looks when it plays out. The proposition's justification is that certain content attracts bad audiences. But that responsibility doesn't just stay contained. We agree on that, but it applies just as easily to violent video games, to gangster films, to war movies, to any media that deals with real or fictional wrongdoing in a way that somebody finds uncomfortable. Once society accepts that content can be suppressed based on the kind of audience it might attract, the question of who gets to make that actual judgment becomes extremely consequential. And the proposition hasn't given you any answer to where it stops or who actually gets to control all this. The third thing, as my teammates elaborated, is on the broader social values of this content. So what I want to add is we actually lose what we actually lose when it disappears. Entertainment formats reach people that documentaries never will. A drama or a dramatized series about a real criminal case can generate public conversation, shift how people think about justice and victimhood, and create genuine empathy for people affected by crime in a way that a formal documentary often doesn't. As it appeals more to younger people who get a stronger grasp of what is actually happening. When you remove that format entirely, you don't just lose sort of the bad contents the proposition is worried about. You lose all of it, as the public ends up less engaged with these issues. So the proposition's ban sounds protective on the surface, but it actually doesn't. But what it actually does is leaves people less informed, less safe and less able to actually engage honestly with the world they live in. And that is why we are no prouder to oppose this motion. Thank you.
This debate came down to one key question. Does banning the media actually protect people, or does it remove the tools that protect them the most? The proposition never answered this, not once. On glorification and toxic fan culture, the proposition said media normalizes criminal behavior and creates dangerous fan culture. But these criminals were already famous before any show existed. Ted Bundy was a phenomenon before Netflix touched his story, and that fascination existed independently. The media didn't just create it, it just examined it and bring it into the light. Banning the examinations does not make the fascination disappear. It just removes the critical lens through which society processes it. Their mechanism was never there. On consent, the second speaker said, victim consent does not matter if the victims can be pressured by money. But this argument destroys itself. If consent is valid because of financial pressure, then the solution is no longer constant consent protections and fairer compensation frameworks, not a blanket ban. You can't argue consent is compromised and then use that justification to remove the victim's choice entirely. That's not protecting victims. On the distinction between dramatization and education, they said real discussion can come from non-commercialized sources, and we are only banning dramatized content, but never explained what non-commercialized sources actually reach out to normal people at the scale. Academic papers do not, news articles don't. The precise reason Making a Murder forced legal reviews is because 40 million people watched it and could engage with it. Non-commercialized alternatives cannot have this reach. On fan culture weighing the accountability, the proposition said that dangerous fan culture outweighed what we argued, but fan culture exists for athletes, musicians, and politicians too. We don't ban the coverage of them, and the fan culture argument has no mechanism connecting it to the actual harm. They cited no document case where the true crime media directly caused criminal behavior with a verified source. We're not dismantling an accountability system, probably because it causes harm that they can't produce. The biggest failure was on accountability. My second speaker showed this media forces institution to face scrutiny and could otherwise never encounter. The proposition has no response. They could not explain what replaces content that reaches millions and forces justice systems into the open. They couldn't explain why their censorship principle stops. They could not explain why the same logic does not apply to documentaries about corrupt politicians and police misconduct. Therefore, I am proud to negate. Thank you.
So, Judge, the opposition is overcomplicating everything and misleading how these medias actually affect the audience. The debate is actually only comes down to the choice between protecting corporate profits and protecting real-world human beings. The most fatal flaw in the opposition's case today is that they have not provided a single reasonable method to prevent these harmful acts from tearing through our society. They have spent their entire time panicking about censorship and defending the rights of giant media networks, but they completely failed to offer an alternative solution. The opposition is trying to minimize the problem by stating that it is unlikely for the audiences to be influenced, but they cannot answer how journalism or other forms of media will make any difference to the audiences. So what is the point of making movies and these shows about these criminals and looking around the world to see you see these similar attacks that are happening everywhere in the world right now, and unstable individuals are using true crime media as blueprint, and victim families are being brutally re-traumatized for views. Have you seen the current status quo change anything? Absolutely not. And leaving things the way they are has done nothing to stop the exploitation, because these profitable companies care about streaming numbers, not ethics. So the opposition has basically ignored all the real world problems that are happening right now, and has not explained how they will keep these societies safe from these negative influences. The opposition is perfectly content to leave the society completely unprotected and offering zero solutions to fix a broken status quo. So they want you to side with Hollywood, while we want you to side with the victims and the whole society and the whole world, because we are the only team offering a real actionable path to stop this cycle of harm and hate. That's why this motion must stand, and we are proud to propose.